1988 was peak Marvel experimentation, and Solo Avengers number 13 is proof. This issue gives us not one, but two stories that show just how wild and creative the late 80s Bullpen could be. First, Hawkeye is chasing down a motorcycle-riding art thief straight out of his Circus past. Then Wonder Man swaps the Avengers mansion for a Hollywood film set, where alien hijinks turn a stunt sequence into cosmic chaos. And somehow, a giant energy bunny explosion. Behind it all, Marvel heavyweights Tom DeFalco, Ralph Macchio, Butch Guice, and Ron Lim, plus a young JayJay Jackson shaping the visual vibe of the late 80s era. We'll dig into their work, the ads that define the issue, and how Solo Avengers bridged old-school anthology storytelling with the rise of the West Coast Avengers. So grab your bow, cue the synthwave, let's dig in. In Beware the Bullet Biker, Hawkeye takes an interest in a series of robberies perpetrated by a brazen thief on a tricked-out motorcycle. After a chase around Los Angeles, Hawkeye, accompanied by reporter Gale Rogers, tracks down the biker in a warehouse. The biker's moves remind Clint of a show rider he knew back in his circus days. After a momentary escape, Clint tracks down the biker, who is indeed an old friend. Unable to show his identity, Clint leaves the biker to the authorities and promises Gale an exclusive interview with the Avenger. The Fall Guy features Wonder Man working his second job as a stuntman in Hollywood. His powers perfectly suited for tackling the most dangerous stunts that the leading man, Dirk Studley, is unable to perform. Frustrated by his status as only the stuntman, Wonder Man flies off the job in search for some fresh air. He comes across a construction site where the workers ask for a demonstration of his strength. But they aren't the only ones keeping an eye on him. A mysterious orb has been tracking his every movement. We learn that the orb is controlled by two mysterious creatures who are shocked to learn that Dirk Studley isn't the superpowered being they were looking for, but Wonder Man is. They manipulate a bulldozer and create a monster out of a large pile of bricks to fight Wonder Man and lure him back to the movie set. They need the mysterious alien entity that has taken over Dirk Studley to transfer over to Wonder Man. When this plan fails, the alien force morphs into a giant bunny and attacks Wonder Man. During the ensuing battle, the bunny exhausts all its energy and explodes. Meanwhile, the film director is ecstatic over the amazing footage he just captured. Oh, and that little orb? Wonder Man turns that into mincemeat without a second thought. This issue was written by Tom DeFalco and Ralph Macchio. DeFalco was also editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, but continued to write for titles like Thor, Fantastic Four, and comics for Marvel's children's imprint, Star Comics. Under DeFalco's guidance as editor, Marvel entered a phase of expansion that provided an opportunity for new talent to enter the comic book industry and release a number of new titles with original characters. After clashing with the company's upper management, DeFalco resigned in 1994. Ralph Macchio is mainly known for his work on Daredevil, Thor, and Spider-Man. He would eventually become the executive editor of the Spider-Man line. By the 2000s, he was editing the Marvel Ultimates line. In 2007, Macchio oversaw the adaptation of Stephen King's Dark Tower novels into a comic book series. Macchio retired from Marvel in 2011. Ronald Lim penciled the first story. Lim is best known for his work on Silver Surfer Volume 3. Earlier in his career, Lim worked for independent publishers until a fateful meeting at a comic book convention in 1987 got him hired on the spot. Aside from Silver Surfer, he also penciled most of the Infinite Trilogy, a large-scale crossover limited series published in the early 1990s, Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, and Infinity Crusade. Jackson Butch Guice penciled and inked the second story and worked on the cover. Guice is primarily known for Micronauts, Swords of the Swashbucklers, X-Factor, The New Mutants, and Iron Man. For DC, he worked on the Death of Superman storyline, as well as the co-creation of The Resurrection Man with writers Andy Lanning and Dan Abnett. He worked on the Wally West version of The Flash post-crisis, drawing 10 of the first 11 issues. Janet JayJay Jackson entered the comics world during Marvel's creative boom of the late 1980s. Joining the company in 1988, she worked as a freelance colorist and designer before becoming art director for Marvel's in-house advertising division. Her keen eye for layout and bold sense of color shaped countless house ads, posters, and promotional campaigns. Working in the legendary Marvel Bullpen, Jackson collaborated with editors and artists who defined the era. Bob Layton, who worked on the cover for this issue alongside Butch Guice, was primarily working on X-Factor before taking on Iron Man at this time. He and David Michelinie wrote the Armor Wars storyline. Layton left Marvel for Valiant Comics in 1991. Speaking exclusively to Read the Freaking Comics, Bob Layton discusses Solo Avengers. I loved working on Solo Avengers with editor Mark Gruenwald, who, besides being a creative, forward-thinking individual, was also a great personal friend. When he approached me about working with him on some episodes of Solo Avengers, I could hardly refuse. Not being a fan of convoluted continuity, the very nature of SA's single-issue stories was very appealing to me. I brought my creative partner at the time, Butch Guice, with me and created 2 installments with him. A Hercules story called A Farewell with Arms, and The Token, featuring the Black Widow, part of which made its way to the MCU. The experimental nature of Solo Avengers allowed Butch and me to switch art chores from time to time, which was a lot of fun. Sadly, I actually plotted several other Solo Avengers stories but never got a chance to see them come to fruition. I left Marvel to become one of the founders of Valiant Comics shortly after my last published installment, so you'll never see my comedic Ant-Man vs. the Hulk or the action-packed Red Wolf vs. Black Panther stories that I plotted for future Solo Avengers episodes. Jack Morelli lettered the first story. He was a staff letterer at Marvel during the 1980s, where he was known by the affectionate nickname Squid because he had worked on a fishing boat. Editor Mark Gruenwald worked for Marvel his entire career. Gruenwald was promoted to full editorship by Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter in 1982. His responsibilities included the Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Spider-Woman, and What If. Gruenwald was famous for a perfect recollection of even the most trivial details. Colorist Greg Wright has spent long stints on titles like Ghost Rider, Marvel Comics Presents, and Spider-Man for Marvel, as well as Batman, Nightwing, and the Titans for DC Comics. With artist Butch Guice, Wright created the character Crippler in Daredevil Annual No. 7 from 1991. Along with artist Steve Butler, Wright created the character Man-Eater in Silver Sable and the Wild Pack in 1993. Rounding out the team was Richard Starkings. Richard is a British font designer and comic book letterer, editor, and writer. He was one of the early pioneers of computer-based comic book lettering, and is still one of the most prolific creators in the industry. Solo Avengers was the brainchild of Mark Gruenwald and was conceived as a callback to Marvel's older anthology-style books that included 2 stories per issue, a regular Hawkeye feature, plus a rotating Avenger backup. It was published as Solo Avengers for 20 issues from December 87 to July 89 until it was renamed Avengers Spotlight with issue number 21 in August of 89. The series was cancelled as of issue number 40 in January of 91. In December 2011, a 5-part limited series titled Avengers Solo was released following the same format as Solo Avengers. Once again, the central story, written by Jen Van Meter and illustrated by Roger Robinson, starred Hawkeye with the cast of Avengers Academy, with Jim McCann and Clayton Harris in the backup story. This was the first of 4 appearances by Dylan Zarro, aka the Bullet Biker. He would later appear in 3 subsequent Avengers Spotlight issues as one of the many criminals trying to get the bounty placed on Hawkeye's shooting arm by supervillain Crossfire. Hawkeye's time in the Circus is fleshed out a little more in other issues of Solo Avengers, but the basics are told in his first appearance in Tales of Suspense number 57 from 1964. The following years would expand upon his story and journey into being an Avenger. Clint Barton was born in Waverly, Iowa. Orphaned at a young age, Clint and his brother Barney ran away from the orphanage to join the Carson Carnival of Traveling Wonders. It was here that Clint was trained by the swordsman and trickshot. After a falling out with them and his brother, Clint adapted his archery skills to become a star carnival attraction, a master archer called Hawkeye, otherwise known as the world's greatest marksman. His run-ins with Iron Man and especially Black Widow led him to the path of becoming a superhero. There's a certain sense of nostalgia when it comes to Solo Avengers, not only because this title dates back to 1988, but mainly due to the simplistic nature of the storytelling, which was a necessity when packing 2 stories into 1 issue. There is simply no fat on these stories. They've been pared down to their bare bones, and for the most part, it works. Hawkeye's Bullet Biker story tells a simple narrative with a catch-me-if-you-can storyline that gets wrapped up fairly quickly. Wonder Man's story is a little more ambitious in its plot involving alien shapeshifters, with a not-so-slight dig at the film industry. The second story lacks any sense of compelling storytelling or a satisfactory ending, as we never do find out who our protagonists are and what their goal was. However, given the satirical nature of the story, this can be forgiven. I see issues of this comic going for $5 on eBay, and PriceCharting.com has mint issues of this comic currently selling for $51 off their high of $72 in July of 2024. In 1998, there were roughly 789,000 comics being published between relatively few publishers in the market. X-Men and X-Men themed titles continued their impressive domination of the comic charts, as both Diamond Comic and Capital City Distribution had an X-Men themed title as the top seller for every month that year. The top-selling title for August was Wolverine #2, with the story of the mutant living in Japan. Capital City lists sales of almost 80,000 copies of that issue alone. Back when comic book advertising was popular, but after the golden age of Atlas body ads, we had a period of time where games, snacks, cards, and even clothing brands were pushing their products in comics. This issue is no different, with no less than 9 brands running various ads. TSR, which at the time was the publisher of Dungeons & Dragons before selling the title to Wizards of the Coast, were promoting their more traditional board games, including Buck Rogers and the Dragonlance sets. Toymaker Cox Hobbies was selling an RC helicopter modeled after the popular CBS adventure show Airwolf. Curious to know if anyone had this as a kid. These are currently selling on eBay for $500. Nintendo was promoting their Gunsmoke game for NES. This was a port over from the popular arcade, but with a slightly different storyline and music. Continuing on the theme of Nintendo, Camerica was promoting their Freedom Stick remote. The device closely resembled the NES Advantage, a joystick released by Nintendo of America in 1987, so much so that Nintendo brought legal action against Camerica because of the product's similarity. Bubble Yum had a Show Us Your Bubble contest running at the time. Participants were urged to snap a photo and write an essay to be eligible to win prizes like a television, camera, or video recorder. Nickelodeon was promoting their Nick Stuff, a mail-order series of t-shirts, caps, backpacks, and more. You could get a free yo-yo with a purchase of $25 or more. That's about $70 today. Marvel was promoting their Inferno crossover series and various X-Men titles like X-Men 240, The New Mutants 71, and X-Factor 36. Video game publisher Ultra Games was doing early promotion work for 3 upcoming NES titles, the beloved Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the edgy Skate or Die, plus the medieval-themed Defender of the Crown. Finally, a trippy little ad from Warner Lambert for a new candy called Candylicious. Warner Lambert, the same company that created Bubblicious bubblegum a decade earlier, created a new fruit chew confection similar to Starburst. Candylicious featured colorful packaging and a name and logo combination that was clearly inspired by the success of the Bubblicious brand. Since quite a few comic shops were listed in this issue, I did a deep dive, and I mean deep, into each one to try to find a shop that is still open to this day. I found a listing for Captain Blue Hen Comics, and although they've moved from their original location and changed owners, I'd say this store definitely deserves to be featured. Although the original owners, Paul and Bob, have since moved on, one of the original locations has been open since 1980. The new owner, Joe, started out as a patron with a subscription membership, then employee, manager, and finally full-fledged owner since 2001. If you're in the area, I highly recommend you check out Captain Blue Hen Comics, located at 280E Main Street, Suite 101 in Newark, or check them out on Instagram at Captain Blue Hen. If you love this trip back to 1988, when Marvel was bold, weird, and running full throttle, make sure to smash that like button and drop a comment below. I want to know your thoughts. Did you prefer Hawkeye's street-level chase or Wonder Man's alien stunt show gone wrong? If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into forgotten gems, behind-the-scenes creator stories, and all the comic book history they don't teach you in film school. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next issue breakdown. We've got more classic Marvel coming your way, from the West Coast Avengers to the wildest corners of the 90s. And always, keep collecting, keep reading, and don't forget to read the freaking comics.